Hi, my name's Jason, and this is Mark, our associate slash youth pastor slash theological ninja. And I serve as lead pastor here at Fellowship, and we're here to interact with questions from the congregation so that you have the opportunity to ask questions of us that you may not have the opportunity to ask on a Sunday morning or any other time and are itching to know the answers. So we're going to try and answer these questions succinctly, briefly, clearly, and biblically, and answer them in less than 3 minutes. Is it 3 minutes?
3 or 5.
3 or 5 minutes. And so here we are.
So the first question we had was, if I got this right, how were Old Testament believers saved?
Gotcha.
How were people saved before Jesus? Like we're saved by looking back to Jesus and believing in his death and resurrection.
Right.
But how was an old covenant believer saved?
If I'm thinking of the right verse is when Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So if people in the Old Testament don't have Jesus, how are they coming to the Father? How are they coming to know the one true living God?
Right.
Yeah, and I think you actually partly answered it in that response. I mean, people, we today in the New Testament, New Covenant time, we're looking back to Jesus, to the Messiah's work, to his life, death, and resurrection on our behalf, and how he has atoned for our sins. And for the Old Testament saint, they're doing the same thing, but from a different angle. They're looking forward. And that's really that simple. Every saint in the Old Testament is always looking forward in faith to what God is going to do to atone for their sin. And you think of Adam, for example, like we got to ask the question, was Adam saved? And that's another question for another time. So somebody might want to ask that later on in our series. But how was Adam saved? Well, Adam was saved by believing in God's promise that he made, and that there would one day be one of his descendants who would ultimately crush the devil and undo the damage that Adam himself had done. And then you look further in Abraham. Well, Abraham himself, how's Abraham being justified? Well, Genesis tells us that Abraham's justified by faith. God credited to him as righteousness because he believed the promise that God was going to bless the nations through Abraham. And we pick up also even in John's Gospel where Jesus says, Abraham saw my day and he rejoiced. And so Abraham is justified through faith by looking forward to Christ. And then ultimately the entire nation of Israel is looking forward to the day that the Messiah was going to do away with the sin in Jacob.
Yeah.
And ultimately the whole sacrificial system points toward that.
Yeah.
So Jesus himself, yes, he is the way and the truth and the life. We have the vantage point or the perspective of looking back to his work. They had the vantage point and the perspective of looking forward to his work. But ultimately, the justification of sinners before a holy God all comes through the Messiah, through whom he worked righteousness and justice and atonement. And that's Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is key in all this is that it has always been through faith.
Mm-hmm.
Our salvation has always been through faith. And even the whole system of laws and sacrifice and covenant, all of that really was, after Abraham, the man of faith, and Abraham's faith in the promises of God is what Paul says that's what justified him.
That's right.
And there's a little verse right second half of Romans 9, and it says, those who didn't receive salvation, they pursued it as if it were by works.
That's right.
And that's a key thing, as if it were by works. It wasn't by works. It was always by faith. But then even like in the New Covenant, the works are a manifestation. It's the faith kind of being lived out.
Yes. And that's a fine line that is easily confused.
Yeah.
Not just intellectually, but even experientially in our own hearts. I mean, when we're obeying Christ, we're obeying him because we've trusted in who he is and what he's done on our behalf. So it's a response. But it seems like the experience of many is that we want to sometimes think that our works are really a justifying act on our part.
Yeah.
But no, it's actually a response to our justification before God. We are trusting wholly in Jesus, and thus our works come out from the faith that we hold in Him.
Yeah, and the thing I would add is that there's enough of Christ, if you will, even in the first book of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, which is one book, the Torah.
Yes.
There's enough of Jesus in that, through, like you're saying, the seed of the woman, Eve's seed. There's songs about, him being the Lion of Judah, different oracles about Christ. And there's enough in there that someone living under the law can look forward and anticipate this coming Messiah, even from the law itself.
Yes.
So